Good afternoon. Let me take off the bandana. Good afternoon. This is Mr. Horton, and today is been annoying, and that's only part of it. Yes, today because I was not here yesterday, I had a ton of catch-up work to do, most of it not in this class, which comprises the great majority of my students, so peace to you all. But anyway, today has been an annoyance. In fact, I'm very late in delivering this lecture. We intend to finish this unit today, but if you notice, in this new unit we're looking at, there's two, you have your terms for the next unit and then your study guide for the next unit. So you want to download those for future reference, and then we will use those going into next week. So what are we doing today? Let's finish the unit, shall we? Yes, there we go. Picking up where I left off yesterday. Like I said, today is September the 10th. This is Thursday, September the 10th. And even though, yes, I'm recording on Wednesday, September the 9th, but this is for the 10th. So, Roman numeral 24. The last remnants of what had been the mighty Roman Empire was to be found on the borders of Asia in what used to be a small fishing town chosen by the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 3rd century. My copy at home is so much better than this. Yes, the 3rd century. This town was called Byzantium before Constantine modestly changed his name to Constantinople, changed the name of the town. And the empire became known as the Byzantine Empire. I've showed you this before. So while the Byzantine Empire unwittingly defended a weak and disorganized Western Europe from one Asian invader after another, it was their brother Christians who sacked the city of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade in the year 1204. A sacking, and you do know what the word sacking means. They basically what happened was the Crusaders, on their way to the Holy Land, stopped by Constantinople and said, "Hey, we'd like to stop in. We'd like to refresh our horses. We'd like to, cool our heels and maybe even take a bath." Because Constantinople did have baths, and the Byzantine emperor was rather wary about letting such a large army inside the gates of a city, and he said no. And so somehow the Crusaders forced their way into the city, and they sacked and destroyed it. Instead of going on the crusade, they sacked the city of Constantinople. The city never recovered. As it says there, the Byzantines survived this sacking in a very weakened state, and for over 2 centuries staved off the Ottoman Turks, who surrounded the great city now from both the east and the west. Sultan Mehmed II. Yes, I told you he was the direct descendant of Dr. Oz. Mehmet Osman hauled 70 full-size ships overland to attack Constantinople from both the Black Sea, and I have the Aegean Sea there. Actually, it's the Sea of Marmara, but that's okay. Before it fell. Defended mostly by 8,000 mercenaries, and the year was 1453. Constantine the 11th died in that sacking. So the city's walls were defended by less than 8,000 mercenaries. The invaders, though, unlike the Christians in Spain, who destroyed all the beautiful mosques and forced the Muslims to either leave or convert to Christianity, the Ottoman Turks took many of the Byzantines' more impressive works and they kept them. For example, as it says there, the Hagia Sophia Church was converted into a mosque and still functions in that capacity today. And next summer, boys and girls, if I have my way, and if this COVID thing ever gets out of here, my wife and I intend to go spend about 6 weeks in Europe. She has a sister-in-law who lives in Spain, about 2 blocks from the Mediterranean, And from there, we're going to leapfrog to other parts of Europe. I would like to go back to Rome now that I can appreciate it. But mostly, I want to go to, what's the city of Constantinople called today? You know, don't you, Miss Batakia? Mr. Fuller? Istanbul, did you say? Yes. I want to go to Istanbul. Yes. I think that's a very interesting city. Not only it has the Hagia Sophia which was built in the 6th century by the Byzantine Emperor um, Justinian, but it also has the Great Blue Mosque, and also I want to go across the straits and stand in Asia. I mean, I just think it'd be significant. I want to go across the straits, the Bosporus Straits, be it on a ferry or on the bridge or on one of the trains, and stand in Asia. Now, secret, also, since we'll be in Spain, I want to go to the southern tip of Spain. There's a ferry that crosses it into Morocco, and be in Africa. And I would have been in 4 continents in my lifetime. And my wife still wants, we're going to go to South America, so that'd make 5. My son went to Australia last year. Forgive me for diverging. So, the Hagia Sophia was converted then into a mosque, and still, actually, it doesn't function as a mosque. It's more of a museum. But I want to go in because in the upper lofts, one of the things that the Muslims left there were pictures of Jesus, Joseph, and Mary in mosaics. I mean, it's in the more, you have to go up, and it's kind of off to the side, and the mosaics have faded. But yeah, I mean, it's really cool. So by the end of the 15th century, that looks terrible. By the end of the 15th century, the Muslims threatened to take over all of Central Europe. Okay, I guess that looks better. By the end of the 15th century, the Muslims threatened to take over all of, let's just fix that, shall we? And that looks even worse. My goodness. By the end of the 15th century, the Muslims threatened to take over of all of Eastern Europe. That's just nuts. Okay. Muslims threatened to take over, and they did. I mean, they really did. I mean, the Ottoman Turks, not so the Ottoman Turks, invaded up the Balkan Peninsula. As it says there, they got to the gates of Vienna on 2 occasions before being thrown back in the 16th century. And they were only thrown back in the 16th century. I mean, looks terrible. 16th century by help from King John Sobieski and the Poles. The Eastern Mediterranean became a Muslim lake, unfriendly to Christian shipping. However, at the Battle of Lepanto, which is on your test, the Battle of Lepanto, how do I remember this? At the Battle of Lepanto, the Spanish beat the Pantos. They basically crushed, they destroyed 1/3 of the Ottoman fleet at the Battle of Lepanto. The Spanish broke the power of the Muslims in the Mediterranean. And so, yes, all right. Although now this goes into the subject of our next unit, let us begin discussing the end of the Age of Faith and the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. Protestant Reformation is our next 2 units. Remember that for several centuries, for most people, it was considered unthinkable to be outside the goodwill of the Roman Catholic Church. Being outside the goodwill of the Roman Catholic Church meant that you didn't pass go, you didn't collect $200, and you didn't get to go to heaven, and you burned and got stabbed by pitchforks for all of eternity. And so how do you not allow that to happen? Answer is you go to heaven. And how do you go to heaven? Answer, you do whatever the church says. So, most people believe that the Roman Catholic Church held the keys to heaven, thereby giving the church great authority to command the actions and treasures of peoples all across Europe. Remember that at one time, the Roman Catholic Church owned 1/3 of all properties in Europe. However, several elements that scandalized and rocked the church to its very foundations. Of course, the failure of the Crusades. I mean, there were 4 Crusades officially, and lots of people died in the Crusades, and lots of money got spent, and nothing came of it. I mean, it was turned out to be a bust. Then there was the Black Plague. Now, the church didn't cause that and couldn't prevent that, but 2 things. When you're an entity that says we know everything and we have the ear of God, and then when people say, well, how can we get away from this Black Plague? And suddenly God has gone mute on you, then maybe you didn't have the ear of God in the first place. And so, yeah, and not only that, with the Black Plague, people began to think, life on this earth, maybe was worth living for now because it was so short. And so then corruption within the Roman Catholic Church. What kind of corruption? Oh, goodness, let me count the ways. Of course, there was scraping money off the collections. Remember, the Roman Catholic Church collected 10% of everybody's income, including the nobility. And most of that money was collected and then shipped to Rome. But as the money passed through hands, more and more people, church people, began scraping, taking off the top, keeping money for themselves. Oh, that's one kind. And then there was just the other kind where it was quite easily understood by the people that the priest and the bishops weren't really interested in their salvation. They were interested in the offering. They were interested in making sure that they had a comfy lifestyle. And it became quite obvious. Remember that Roman Catholic priests take a vow of chastity and poverty. Now, I'm sure you understand poverty, which means not to have anything. But chastity means Roman Catholic priests take a vow of no sex, which when Roman Catholic priests began trolling around town with 1, 2, and 3 women following behind them and a passel of children, it became evident to the people that perhaps the Roman Catholic, these priests, had forgotten their vows. Yes. Those kind of corruptions that were going on. And see that was analyzing the church. And remember, I talked about Pope Alexander VI, father to his own grandchild. I mean, that is wrong on so many levels, as you might imagine. And then there was the Great Schism, which I've already talked about, I think. The Great Schism was when the Council of Cardinals went to elect a new pope, and the Italian cardinals voted for this guy, and the French cardinals voted for that guy, and for a while there were 2 popes, the Great Schism. Eventually, they met again, deposed both popes, and elected a third, a new pope. Point of the matter was, it became quite evident to the people that, these priests, this church it wasn't about God, it was about power. And, then there was the Babylonian captivity. Babylonian captivity was a instance where the French king, because he got angry with the Pope, actually forced the Pope to leave Rome and come and live in Avignon, Avignon. Avignon is a town in France where the French king, I think it was Francis I, could keep an eye on him. Yes, heresy. It's a word that'll come up a lot in the next few chapters, heresy. Once again, I talked about the advantage that Catholic students have, Catholic school students have over you. If I ask them what heresy is, they'll tell you straight up. And I'm not even talking about the AP students. I'm talking about rank and file. Heresy is the practice of teaching or professing something that is contrary, that goes against the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. What is the punishment for heresy? The punishment for heresy is being the guest of honor at a barbecue, if you know what I mean. Be burned at the stake. Yes, quite so. Yeah. And lots of people got burned at the stake for various reasons. But heresy, to be declared a heretic, yeah, that's what heresy was. Okay. How does this happen? This is terrible. Two new movements question Roman Catholic practices in the 15th. This is terrible. In the 15th century. What? How does that happen? It's just terrible. It must be some kind of way that it's. In the 15th century. One was called Lollardy. Now, Lollardy is a generalized term. As it says there, Lollardy, which came from this guy named John Wycliffe of England, which actually was several types of ideas, but it was not a united movement. In other words, they shared a lot of the same objections to Roman Catholic practices, but not all Lollards had the exact same beliefs. Some, for example, some of the Lollards were Anti-Trinitarians. How's that for a word? And once again, I don't know. Catholic school students may or may not know what that is, but you got to break it down into its component parts. Anti means against. Trinity is a reference to the Holy Trinity, the idea of God being not one but three people, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. They look to the Bible and not to. So Anti-Trinitarians are people who did not believe that God was three entities, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Yeah. The Lollards, look to the Bible and not Roman Catholic authorities as the sole voice of Christianity. They were also against the celibacy of the priesthood. How does this happen? And I'm so sorry. Of the priesthood. They were against confession to priest. If you know anything about Roman Catholicism, confession is one of the, learn them now, 7 sacraments. There are 7 sacraments in the Catholic faith. One of them is confession, holy confession of priesthood. The Lollards were against that practice. They also disagreed with that word transubstantiation, which is not on this test, but will be on a future test. And if I went to my old school covenant Catholic and said, "Hey, what is transubstantiation?" in religious class, they would know it, and you don't. So, but it's a thing, transubstantiation. What does that mean? Well, one of the 7 sacraments, as you may know, is Holy Communion. That's when, during Mass, during the church service, the very focal point of the church service, the parishioners, the Catholic faithful, go up to the front and are given the communion host, the bread, the body of Christ, and a cup of wine, the blood of Christ. Now, transubstantiation is a belief that says that when you eat that, when you ingest the wafer, and when you drink the wine, it actually becomes the body and blood of Christ inside of you. It's called transubstantiation. Yeah, interesting. And I'm not sitting. Trust me, I'm not sitting here denying anything. Don't ever think Mr. Orton's making fun of a religion. Don't you go home and say that, because that'd be a lie. But yeah, that's what transubstantiation means. That when you eat the blood, or rather the communion wafer and the wine, it becomes the body and blood of Jesus Christ. So keep continuing on. John Wycliffe and his followers were expelled from the church for their criticism of the Roman Catholic Church, RCC. Hasidism was a movement that followed the teachings of the Chancellor of the University of Prague, a guy named Jan Hus. Jan Hus. Pardon me for a moment. Jan Hus. Give me a minute. Pull up something. Ah, yes. I love Europe. Love going to Europe. I love it when computers work as well. That's really cool. Yes. Ah, see that? Yours truly was in Prague in 2018. And this is the central square in Prague. And this is a statue dedicated to none other than Jan Hus in the Czech Republic. And so this statue is dedicated to him. Jan Hus was burned at the stake because he wanted to make changes in the Roman Catholic Church. One of the changes he wanted to make was that at that point in time, during that point in time, rank and file members of the Catholic Church could not drink the wine. Only the priest could. And he wanted to be able to share the cup of wine with all members of the church. And of course, the Roman Catholic Church did not take too kindly that, and the man was burned at the stake. And yeah, that's who he was, Jan Hus. Now, it is worth noting, the burning of Jan Hus took place about 100 years before Martin Luther will nail his 95 Theses on the door of the Church of Wittenberg. Now, and Martin Luther was basically saying the same thing as Jan Hus was. They both were reformers. They wanted to reform the church. But Martin Luther, of course, escaped and becomes the father of a new religion. Jan Hus gets turned into cinders. What's the difference? The difference, and this is worth noting, the difference was the printing press. Remember, the printing press was invented in 1456, and Martin Luther used the printing press to spread his ideas. And by doing that, it didn't just spread his ideas, but a lot of people around Europe who read Martin Luther were in sympathy with how he felt. And so Martin Luther had a greater backing. It was more difficult to find and prosecute Martin Luther. He had more friends. Jan Hus, on the other hand, was a chancellor of a university in Prague and pretty much alone, and I'm sure pretty much alone when he was burned at the stake. But the difference was, and this is what's important, the printing press. Yes, thank you, Johann Gutenberg. Okay, where did that go? Right here. Yes. So, Jan Hus criticized the Roman Catholic Church for its wealth and worldliness. Jan Hus, that is just terrible. Jan Hus was summoned before the Council of Constance and was condemned as a heretic, tried and burned at the stake. The Council of Constance in Germany then tried to enforce decrees of reforms upon the Roman Catholic Church. This council, the same one who had burned Jan Hus, decreed that all Christians, even the Pope, was subject to their findings. Now let's go back over that sentence again. This council, when they burned Jan Hus, the papacy said, "Oh, you burned some guy. How terrible." But then the council said, everybody has to pay attention to what we're saying, including the Pope himself. This was not well received by the Holy See. The Holy See, another name for the papacy. This was not well received by the Pope. Pope Pius II at the time issued the papal bull. The word bull No. The word bull is on your test. It means a direct order from the papacy, from the Pope himself. Issued the papal bull execrabilis, yes, which condemned as heretical. In other words, so the Pope said, if you do this, you're a heretic. If you do what I'm about to say, if you do this, if you trip over this line, you are a heretic. And guess what? You get burned at the stake. So issued the papal bull execrabilis, which condemned as heretical any council that tried to overrule the authority of the papacy. While the papacy had, for now, established its control over its own church, much of the prestige of the Roman Catholic Church had been lost, as well as its strong influence over national governments. Roman numeral 27. The Renaissance papacy is a reference that covers popes from the Great Schism of 1417 to Martin Luther's 95 Theses of 1517. Popes like Julius II and Alexander VI. Julius II, you do recall, was the Pope who paid Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And Alexander VI set a new low in papal standards of behavior. Aside from having Michelangelo paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and hitting him with his stick one time, Julius II was also known as a warrior pope in his efforts to consolidate his control over the papal states. Remember again that at one point in time, the Pope was called the King Pope, because he was an actual king. Pope Julius II also commissioned the destruction of Constantine's Basilica of St. Peter and initiated the construction of the largest church in the world today. What is the name of the largest church in the world today? A church that is so big that if you go inside of it, they have marks carved in the floor that tells you Notre Dame in Paris would come to here, that St. Paul's Cathedral in London would come to here, that, all the great churches of, Europe would only fill up this much space. That place is called St. Peter's Basilica. Let's see if I have a picture of St. Peter's Basilica. Rome. PQR. Rome, Trojan. Oh, here we go. Here's a bad picture of St. Peter's Basilica, if you will. Bad. I took it myself. Now, that's not a very good picture. Hello. Well, that's just terrible. I hate this thing. But anyway, you see this? Okay, these are people here. But so are these. And the thing is so big, I couldn't even get the whole thing in the picture. By the way, these are all statues of saints up here. But I've been in this thing. Michelangelo designed the dome, by the way. I can't understand why I can't blow it up. But yes, that was what he began the construction of. St. Peter's Basilica. St. Peter's Basilica, which is in Rome. Michelangelo also sculpted Moses for his tomb. Okay, Pope Sixtus. He was the Pope Sixtus. How do I do this? God, I hate this. I know that provides you all some entertainment, yes. Pope Sixtus was the Pope who began to practice what is called nepotism. You say, what does it mean? Nepotism, basically it came from the fact that the man hired his nephew to be a bishop. You see, the man who had no qualifications. And being a bishop in the Roman Catholic Church meant that you would never have to work a day in the rest of your life and you would live in utter opulence. But yeah, nepotism simply refers to the hiring of relatives. in a corporation or in any company. And it comes from what Pope Sixtus did. And then, of course, Pope Alexander the Sixth, yeah, he was the one who fathered his own grandchild. Interesting guy. And held orgies regularly inside St. Peter's Basilica. Pope Leo X, who executed Martin Luther, completed the construction of St. Peter's Basilica, an undertaking the financing probably set off the Protestant Reformation. And we will talk about that later on see you all tomorrow. I'm going to cut this short, and I will talk to you all later. So, yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Okay, let me see here. Here we go.